to be recorded, then please by all means share them with myself or Tom after the session. It's something that digital leaders we like to do in terms of people who couldn't make the sessions being able to catch up later. If you're not talking, please mute your microphone, which everyone is doing, so fantastic, thanks very much. If you do want to talk, as I say, we want it to be interactive. We don't want to just talk for 40 minutes. Stick your hand up using the raise your hand button, or turn your camera on and wave at me if that's easier, and we'll make sure we get everyone's voice into the conversation. But also in Microsoft Teams, there's a chat, a conversation window, so feel free to use that along the side of when we're talking if that works for you as well, and we'll try and pick up on what's going on there. And even if we don't, I'll be going through this all minutely after the session to pick out things which hopefully will help me do a good job over the months and year to come.
And I think the thing that we're hoping will facilitate that is we hope to be as slick as a talk show radio duo. So while Alistair is speaking, I'll be playing the role of producer Tim. I'll keep an eye on the chat and can play in interesting things that are coming through there. So yeah, don't wait until someone stops speaking. Just chuck your ideas straight in the chat, and whichever one of us isn't speaking can do the interrupting for you.
Absolutely. So if you want to now would be a great time to just type a message in the chat saying if there's anything particular you want us to talk about today, or you wanted to think about during the session, and we'll try and make sure we get around to those kind of areas. That'll help us kind of pitch the session. But as I said at the beginning, for people who join late, we're not sure how many people we're going to join who don't really know much about children's services because of the platform that we launched it on. So we'll do a quick run through that now, and then come back to the main conversation. So about Data to Insight, it's very focused on children's social care and children's services more generally. It's a project which builds off an existing community. Ofsted, the regulator of children's services, set up a framework of data that they would require for inspections. And off the back of that, then we've built a set of tools which every local authority can then use to support them in their inspections, but also in their kind of general operational and performance work. So we have a library of shared analysis tools for all local authorities to use. And around that, we have this community, which is hosted on the Knowledge Hub at the moment. And we have a mailing list of around 600 names across every local authority in the country. And that community kind of breaks down into some people who actively work on developing tools and supporting them, some people who will kind of be our beta testers who test and report back on when things aren't working or suggest features, and then a much larger group of people who kind of use the tools that we push out and benefit from them, but don't have the time or the inclination to get involved further than that at the moment. So our core goals for Data to Insight at the moment, I've been in post for about 2 months, and the project's been lacking a full-time resource for a while. So core goals are to maintain the existing toolkit, make sure it keeps working, and when the DFE put out new data, get that data into the tool, into the tools, so that we don't have every local authority trying to do the same bit of transformation work with the data that the Department for Education put out. We can do it once and then share it with local authorities and kind of reduce the work there. Coordinate the development of new tools. So we've just done a big piece with Tom's organisation, Social Finance, around modelling demand after coronavirus lockdown and what that will look like, because again, it's an area that everyone's interested in local authorities, but not everyone has time to do a kind of complex data modelling piece on it. So if we do that and then let people put their data into it, that's helpful. And then third, and definitely not least of all, facilitate the community and make sure the community works for its members. And that's what we want to talk about today. So in terms of the community, we kind of come from this point of the community's grown up around a tool that we developed. But at this point, we feel the community is arguably more valuable than the tools we've developed. And the benefits of having those engaged people who will develop things for us or with us and put their time into making things that every local authority can use far outweighs the benefit that I, as one person with a board of kind of volunteers supporting me, can do. With that said, we know it's hard to make time for non-essential work. So if this is something you do on the side of your day job supporting a local authority with their performance in children's services, then how do you make time for it? What's the incentive to you to do that, to contribute to other local authorities getting the best out of your work? But the potential benefits are very wide-ranging. So the potential for what we can get out of it is brilliant. For example, we have one authority that put together a piece of work which just lets you put the data you've submitted to the Department for Education into a tool which will then simulate what the DFE's data release will look like when they finally publish it 6 months later. So you get a kind of instant view of what your data is going to look like when it's published. And again, it's the kind of thing that every local authority wants to do and is trying to do. If we can help that work happen once and then be used 150 times, or even be used 20 times, then that's well worth us existing, and that's the real benefit of the community. But beyond that, we think there's a lot more scope for kind of sharing expertise and best practice and those innovations that happen that, oh, don't do it that way, do it this way, it's much better, it'll work easier, it'll save you time, or it'll generate better insight. Those things that, as Tom was saying, might be happening already in one place. How do we make sure that as much as possible, it's really easy for those to spread through our networks? And that's kind of what we want to talk about today. And what we're proposing is really quite a kind of open conversation that people can chip into. And I've got a lot of ideas about this already. Tom's got ideas as well. We'll talk at each other and hope that you kind of interrupt us and muscle in and tell us where we're wrong and where we're right, because this is the kind of thing we want to be doing over the next year or so to make our community work better for its members. And obviously a lot of the people in the chat are the members, and they'll have probably better ideas than me. So we split that into two questions really to frame the conversation, which is, well, what do you actually value in your good networks first, and make sure we're right about that. And we can test what we think is valuable about our network, but we really want to hear from other people. And then after that, thinking about the fact that I exist as a kind of facilitator for this community and for the tools that we've built. Can that kind of facilitating role help, and how does it help, and what are the things that you would want from it, or do you want for it, or do you get from it, or do you not get from it? And that's really it. That's those are our key questions.
So this would be a great moment to invite some interruptions. So I think, judging by the bar at the bottom, there are 10 people on this call who aren't me or Alistair. Could any of you who are not in children's services wave in the chat? I warn you, we'll pick on you first to ask about what networks you're involved in and what you value in them. Awkward.
That's a no.
All right, so I think we've established that either no one wants to answer that question, or or everyone's in children's services. So in which case, perhaps we could ask instead, Tom Monks, go for it.
Yeah, I'm actually not in children's services or work for a local authority. I work for Ultrex, who are a self-service platform. We've just built a public sector team, and I look after a number of central government and local government organisations. Had a conversation with Alistair, and today was for me just to really get more information of how things are working, and really just be a sponge of what you guys are talking about. So probably can't help with another sector, but hello, and I'm Tom.
Hello. All right, so give me a moment. Jennifer Smith is typing. Hopefully it's not an accident. All right, while we wait for that message to come through, then I think it's a case of saying, look, assuming that most of the rest of the group are children's services, which would make sense because that's where, the community that we're a part of and where we've advertised this. Who is already involved with Data to Insight, using tools like the chat, turning up to networks like the NPA IMG groups, and if you are, like, why? What do you get out of it? Deborah. Oh, Deborah, I think you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. Deborah Sloan from Cheshire East. We use the chat rule regularly, so we run it once a month, and that goes out to all the service managers, is analysed and heavily quite well used and well received.
So that's the main benefit then, Tom. For
Deborah, people get the tools. What about NPI
tools? Right? Yeah.
So you've got regional groups that you can go to sort of talk to colleagues working in the same sector. Alistair Lee, I can see you in the corner. I know I can ask you, but before I do, anybody else goes to sort of a regional group or takes place in a Google Groups discussion or anything like that? Okay, Stephen.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, Stephen Wilson from Durham County Council. We do use the chat and the tools. I think that the tools you talked around the DFE returns were sort of golden using them this year. Really, it saves us a lot of time and effort when we trying to sort of get the returns signed off. We can just chuck our data into those tools and sort of present them back to managers, and it saves sort of quite a bit of time. In terms of regional groups, I mean, we have in the Northeast, we have a Northeast Regional Performance Group, which sort of links in quite closely with other regions. We get Ofsted coming up quite often to talk around changes to sort of their data requirements and stuff. And there's a lot of sharing goes on in those groups around performance and practice and that type of stuff. So we find that really beneficial. We also have we're a Liquid Logic user within Durham, so we have a Liquid Logic reporting user group as well, which we find really useful. That gets more into the detail around the nuances of getting data out of systems and how we present it based on the use of Liquid Logic. Appreciate not everyone uses that system, but we find that really useful as well. And again, it's just good networking opportunities.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the things you're saying, Stephen, about there being different groups, and actually I think from the point of view of my job, which is part of my job, kind of literally says, well, make sure the chat community works well, and you kind of get given this list of 600 email addresses and names, and obviously I've worked in children's services, so I know some of them, but definitely not all of them, or even most of them. But actually, when you're talking about a network, you're not talking about a bag of 600 users who are all in the same place doing the same things, actually. And you're not talking about this one self-contained thing, because there'll be some people who are off on the side doing more education stuff and occasionally dip into a bit of social care. There'll be some people who need to populate the chat report every month, and that's the main reason they're there for. There are others who really need a tool that doesn't exist yet, and they're thinking maybe I can get some help with working this. And this idea of actually, well, the network is more complex than just a group of people, and it's not the same as having an office full of 10 people all working on one thing. There are subgroups within there, and they might have different needs and benefits, and there might be overlaps with other things that are going on. And not getting in the way of that is probably one of the most important things to bear in mind.
Yeah, agree with that. Yeah.
So one of the things that we said about what we think people value about this network is that they can get different things from it and kind of contribute at a level that suits them. And I have these imaginary local authorities in my head that don't exist, but one is absolutely terrible and has cut all its analyst resource and can't do anything for itself. And the other is brilliant and has got billions of pounds of funding secretly somehow and has got a team of 300 data analysts all just beavering away just on the question of looked after children numbers. And with these two imaginary local authorities, I can say that, well, one of them, it's really valid for that authority to do nothing in our group, but go and get the chat and the benchmarking tool and the stat returns tools that then help them do things that they haven't got resource to do themselves locally. One is really, really beneficial for them to be able to actually push some of that best practice out that they've developed and kind of mainstream it and say, well, we've got all of this resource and this ability to do something that we want to do for ourselves. And actually, it's not that much extra work for us to then make it available for other people to use. And those different tiers of involvement. And one of the things we think about the community we've got at the moment is that, I said at the beginning, we've got a core group of maybe 20 authorities who are quite active and do a lot of work with us. And then there's another 130 who aren't as active, but maybe 50 of those will send us bug reports or tell us when something's not working. And is that natural, or is that the right balance, or are there authorities out there who would share something but they can't get over the barriers to doing it? Is there something getting in the way in terms of they've got an IG officer saying no, you can't share that, or they've got a manager who says why are you wasting time on this? You've got to just do your local authority's work, or is there not is there a legitimacy thing around it? And understanding what that balance is quite difficult to get at without talking to each individual person and get those perspectives. It'd be a great time to say if anyone's got any of those perspectives, then chip them in here so we can understand them.
So I think it's worth I mean, living this business of tools, I think, if we talk about, to some extent, the network is an end in itself. if people are members of that, if they're connecting with one another, sort of that's where, sort of new ideas spread. That's where if somebody's got an answer to a question, they can share it with everybody else, and it's actually worked up from scratch. One of the things that we found, we did a quick survey with Alistair in the Southeast. You might have to correct me on the number, but I think it found that, and just asking people the question, do you have any tools that you've developed that rather than just being a one-off, you use over and over again, maybe every year, maybe every quarter, maybe every day, maybe things that you shared with somebody else who you happen to know, maybe things that you haven't. And I think we found about 15, the vast majority of which had never been shared to more than 2 or 3 LAs. So we sort of got this sense that there's a huge pool of great tools out there that don't necessarily get shared. And at that point, I thought, right, brilliant, job done. Alistair, go for it.
Well, I was just going to say that, yes, and it wasn't just children's social care. So there were education tools, there were forecasting tools for place planning and early years. So it was way much broader than what we've ended up with at the moment, because that we kind of got scared around there's so much potential here. Let's just reel it back to children's social care, because we had the chat as a really good exemplar. And there's the 903 tool that James created. Again, and that was a classic case because he produced it and shared it in the Southeast, and then a number of LAs had changed staffs and forgotten about it. So when he mentioned it at a subsequent meeting about 18 months later, it was picked up again. And that for me was, we need a central place for this sort of stuff. We can't just rely on LA to LA sharing or sharing within regional groups. So it was, the value for me is bringing, having someone spinning the plates from a central point and supporting the regions, supporting the LAs. And as Alistair says, people will have their own interests. And as Alistair knows, mine is modelling at the moment. But other people have got other interests. So yeah, it's about how we make the most of the different groups of interested people.
Yeah.
So I think one of the key things, and this is for people to check me on really, because this is my bargaining position. I think one of the kind of key things that we can contribute as data to insight to this group of people, which would exist without us, realistically, that they might not be all banded together in a group of 600, but they'd be talking to each other across their regional groups or what have you. But one of the things that we can do is kind of draw people in to that level of being kind of engaged in some way with what we're doing, and help them find that stuff that's going on. Sam's put a message in the chat saying that demos would be useful of the tools. Could we show how they're being used? And instead of saying, as we did, the demand modeling tool is up, and if you want to put your numbers in and see what's going on, then you can we show how that's happening in a local authority or something like that? Sam, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, it was kind of less to do with demos and more to do with kind of building that community. So unlike other colleagues in the room, I'm not on the technical side, as those that know me well, such as Deborah and Alistair will know. But where I come in and where my strength is on that performance management side and making those links between, the data and actual improvements in practice and monitoring that and being able to showcase some of that. And I just think that we sometimes miss a trick, because whilst the tools are useful, if there isn't an understanding in an organisation of how to get the use of someone like me who can confidently talk about what that data is saying with the service as well as with data colleagues, then sometimes you don't always get that traction that you might want. So you'll have the chat and you'll have the tool and you'll send it out to managers, but without that missing link in the middle of someone that can explain what the charts mean to a social work team manager, that's sometimes where it goes off. And to be fair, we're not asked when we have Ofsted come in, we're often asked about how do you use the data and how can you evidence impact. So as well as having the tools, I think most of us, everyone knows that we do use the tools well, but it's that bit around having the impact. So it's just trying to see if we can build the community to use some of those examples, be it, sharing performance management hierarchies or how it works, or examples of, the chat feeds in here and then it goes here and here, and this is how it's used to identify case audits, or, some practical uses as well as, so for example, I pull out the exceptions, so, and then like I used to make sure that if we had 4 or more contacts, those were looked at by the service. And I think that there's through the job that I do, I know that the chat is used very differently across my 23 local authorities. So some will run the chat regularly as part of their regular performance framework, and others will then use that information and they will, use it to drive audit activity and work really closely with the practice improvement arm of the service. And I think we've got a responsibility as data people to make sure it's used. So just how the community can be developed to do some of that, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I'm thinking about my engagements in regional groups, which I've not been to the Northwest group, but we talk a lot about what the data is saying, and we talk a lot about which measures we're measuring.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we have a lot of conversations about the performance framework that it fits into and how we do that work. I mean, maybe that's what you're getting at, that it's kind of where the ADCS kind of stuff is very much focused on, well, the social work kind of practice and what the numbers say about that. Maybe there's something there for us that, as well as just putting out tools, it could be helping that conversation happen about, well, how do you do performance?
And it is something that we have had discussions on at our regional group. So I kind of always try and encourage, if we've not got visitors coming to our regional group, then I will ask local authorities, as Deborah knows, to showcase their performance management framework, to give examples within the region. So Cheshire East have stood up and done that, Cheshire West have done that, Knowsley have done that, I've done it for Oldham. So it does have impact, and I think it is useful. I know that our little community up in the Northwest do find that stuff useful as well.
Do you think there's potential for us to grow that and kind of create those little kind of pipes out of the region to other regions and say, well, actually, here's a showcase that we did regionally. You might find it interesting from the other regions, and that's kind of where that potential, as you say, that, as I say, that facilitating in the middle kind of can come in. Yeah. So I know that something great's happening in the Northwest here. Are you thinking about things like this?
Yeah, I think so. And whether or not Knowledge Hub has got the capability to do that in a more organic way or not, I don't know. I'm not on it regularly because I don't have to do the chat anymore because I don't work for a local authority. So I'm not on it as regularly as I used to be. But I do think that, I know it was useful when we did it up in the region, and I know that those connections have been made, which I think Deborah was saying that, I think that our network up here is quite a good network, and people do, it's one of the best attended regional meetings that we do up here.
Yeah, my take on the Knowledge Hub group is that it doesn't actually, it has all the things that you want. It ticks all the boxes, but actually people don't use them in our group. And whether that's because of how the group's structured or the Knowledge Hub or what have you, I'm not sure yet. But I think it is one thing to look at. Well, could a new lick of paint or something, revitalise that? I don't know. What else have we got, Tom? What else do we value about our network? I think part of what we value is about those different levels of engagement.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, as somebody, like Sam, I don't work in local authority, so I guess I kind of got like sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the sector, and maybe like slightly different perspective. And I try and look and think, like, what do people appear to value? Like, what do people do when they go onto those groups? Sort of one part seems to be like classic communities of practice type stuff. Like it's, people are asking, have you received this FOI as well? And, how did you define X, Y, and Z to answer it? And in which I think is like a variant on what you talked about earlier with, why solve the same problem 150 times? Mm-hmm. A big driver is clearly sort of the chat in particular, and increasing the other tools to say that, again, I suppose as a big version of the same, right? If everybody's got the same problem, I think with certainly with the recent sort of demand modeling one, the survey suggested somewhere in the region of 70% of performance managers had been asked the same question about what COVID would mean for their numbers. So, well, look, if 70% of 150 LAs are being asked the same question, let's not build 150 of these. So, people come for that. But I think within that, it seems really clear that different people, have different interests. Is that about kind of descriptive analysis, the kind of which you get in the chat? Is that about modeling different scenarios like in the new tool? Is that about something else? And people have different amounts of time that they're able to give. I know I did a project once with Bracknell Forest and Suffolk, not Suffolk. It was Surrey. You couldn't get a bigger difference in size between the teams. And that's reflected in how much time people have to spend on a side project. Yeah. And I think one of the things that's striking is to see that the network doesn't seem to, people don't join a network to be in a network. They join a network to get something really specific. And it's usually they have a particular tool they want to work on. So what you see is in the end is networks and networks. You've got a group who are involved in making the chat. You've got a group who are involved in, sort of a modeling tool. You've got a group that might be involved in the stats predictor. You've got a group that might be involved in something else. And I think it's making sure that when somebody comes up with a new idea, like James's stats predictor, that it's visible to everybody else and the people who are interested in getting involved in that can do. And that it reaches beyond like the personal networks that people might have like immediately around them. And then also, I think the other thing that's been really, that I've seen that looks really valuable, and I think like with the way Kent worked around the modeling tool was kind of give people easy ways to get involved as well as hard ones, to say, look, you might not have like 6 hours to build a new feature that everyone's talking about, but maybe you do have 30 minutes to review this and look for errors. Maybe you do have like an hour to stick your data in and see if it comes out sensible, and like really valuing the role that people can play in like bug hunting as well as in developing new pieces, so that there's ways for more and more people to get involved in more projects.
That actually takes us nicely onto the second part of our question, which is about what we can actually do to facilitate that kind of sitting in the middle. Alistair's got his hand up though to say something. So Alistair, over to you first.
I was just going to say that with the project at the moment, it's kind of changing its function, because it was that the chat was built, the social care benchmarking tool was built because Rashid and Jean thought they were great things to do. Everybody agreed with them and started using those tools. And then we found other ones from different LAs, so the stats predictor from James, etc., and somebody developed a chin tool as well. But we're now moving into a place like with the modelling stuff is somebody can go and look for the demand around the country. Everybody is trying to do X. So okay, how can we therefore collectively deal with that? Because we've now got you in post, Alistair, who can sort of capture that from the regional discussions and stuff. So it's then a bit of community should sit around that. So it's kind of we're moving into a slightly different place with the community, because it was a case of just keeping the current tools spinning and the communities who are using and helping with those ticking along. But now the work where we're moving to is, we needed to know very quickly what would happen to the number of CP as a result of COVID. And so a number of LAs started working on modelling tools. Those were brought together, MHCLG funded, but a lot of support from social finance to bring something together. And that's a different world.
So one of those key facilitators is finding out what's happening, isn't it? And making it kind of seen and known. And that does feel like a job that you can do. You can't do it, like each individual member of the community can't do, except with the colleagues that they're working with quite closely. And so that central kind of place, making ways for that to happen, feels really important.
And it's about capturing it from all over. So there's the knowledge hub, or wherever we end up. There is the regional meetings, but also there's the Google group, and the Google group is absolutely essential to this, because there's so much conversation that goes on in the Google group that someone who is lurking can sort of start getting themes from.
That's a great point. Yeah, one of the things that we said, we titled this presentation in more of a hurry than we perhaps should, and the first thing that we realised after titling it was that we shouldn't have called it Building Our Network, because you don't generally build a successful network. It happens, it grows itself. And the Google group and the chat group are obviously great examples of that, that the formal networks all exist, and then these things have kind of established themselves and become really successful because there was a need for them and people want to contribute to them. And you can't just go out and say, oh, I want to build myself a data to insight network and get everyone to do everything that I want them to do in it. You have to kind of move with what's happening naturally on the ground almost. So perhaps helping our network, thrive would have been a better way to title it the Building Our Network. Although that wouldn't have fit as nicely on the title box. So helping stuff happen, knowing what's going on. I'm wondering, the other question I had for the group was, presumably those analysts, got a message from Tom in the chat saying obviously we're, you know, pedal to the metal and just getting through with all the statutory stuff, and find the fact that people are sharing the chat invaluable, and that's great. I'd imagine not every local authority is in that position, and some of them are building analytical tools that they could share but don't. And I'm wondering if there are barriers there that we can help with, or if those barriers are sometimes just insurmountable and costs to operation. I wonder if there's anyone that wants to weigh in on that, if they have things they do locally that they can see that they would be useful to other local authorities, but they can't see a way through to actually making that happen. And is there anything we could do, or is that just how it is?
Yeah, I mean, even hypothetically, if you had a tool that you think other people might be interested in, what's the kind of stuff that would stop you being able to share it, or would make you nervous about sharing it?
So I can talk from my previous experience in, I won't say which one of the 3 LAs I'm talking about each time, but we're just not sure if we're allowed to share things or not. There's a little bit of nervousness about doing it. Our legal team say we cannot share it, but don't really explain why, because we'll be liable for something if something goes wrong. We just haven't got the time to support it. So says the manager.
Alistair, when you guys were being told that you're not allowed to share things because you'd be liable if someone misused it and something went wrong, are you ever able to ask the legal team, well, okay, how do we get around that? Like, what kind of license conditions would we put on this?
Yeah, so you end up going down licensing, or we did end up going down this licensing exploration of, well, how would we have to license it so that people could provide it, and then deciding that the cost was just too much in terms of the work to do it. And
in which I have some great news for you then. See, look, we could be a radio duo. This is seamless. Look, this is a problem that exists worldwide. This is not about data analysis. It's not about children's services. It's not about public sector. You know, anybody who has ever built something for free and wanted to share it with the world has had to deal with the question of what happens if someone misuses it and I get sued. And there are like standard free off-the-shelf solutions to that, which no one has to pay a penny for. And if anybody wants to see one, if you download the latest version of the COVID demand modeling tool from Knowledge Hub, have a look on the license tab. You've got an example and a link. So, I mean, this is sort of a pillar of what the open source movement provides, is a variety of basically copy and paste licenses. And the Kent one, I think, is probably suitable for most children's services projects. You don't have to be a lawyer to make sense of it. And it basically says, number one, this is provided as is. Right? Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, that's not my problem. I'm not legally responsible for how you use this or what goes wrong. I'm just providing it as a favor to the world. And then it says number two, you are free to copy this, change this, use it for other things, so long as you don't use it to make money. And there are variants, some of which allow people to make money, some of which don't allow you to change it, some of which might say you can do what you want, but you need to give credit to us. But essentially, those are the two things that I think people cover. Like, number one, I'm not liable. And number two, how are other people allowed to reuse this? And, I mean, that might be a great thing that we can provide as a network is sharing with people the off the shelf copy and paste licenses that exist for the most common purposes, and maybe local government legal people to sort of to give it the rubber stamp and say, this is, acceptable for the majority of government projects. Certainly in central government, that's quite common. So you have the open government license is a good example of an open source license, and it's one that I think goes on almost all national statistics productions.
Yeah, I think that it sounds great to me. What I wonder is if it will help people, and that's the acid test, really, isn't it? I suppose one thing is
weigh in and explain, because what's most useful is to hear that we're wrong, right? Can somebody who's not me or called Alistair say, okay, yeah, your open source thing, that sounds great, but my LA wouldn't allow it, and here's why.
I'm going to leap in there because it's quiet. I think it's a lot of it is about in LAs just being okay about it. I came in having not worked in LAs all the time, and it just seemed like a no-brainer to do it. I developed this, other people might find it useful, put it out there. And my LA were okay about it. In fact, what I did it through the region, so it was one of the benchmarking products we did, and so that was much easier to do because it was done under CSC. But I think there's just that culture of it's in-house, and therefore there's nervousness about sharing it. In East Sussex, there was a big project to try and sell something like a contact point, because we developed our own product, and actually then went out to try and sell it, and obviously nobody wanted to buy it. Had we given it away, it might have worked. But then you've got, as Alistair said and Tom said, it's the capacity to support it. And I think that's where, again, we've got to shift that actually some people will, some people won't. And this is what I've done. It's a scrappy Excel spreadsheet. It's brilliant, but I ain't going to touch it anymore. There's a license on the back. So it's getting our heads around that and being, okay to share. And I think I'm hoping that people, as they see the project develop, will say, okay, well, yes, so-and-so put up a tool, and so-and-so put up a tool, and so-and-so put up a tool. It'll just become a more normal thing to do. We're not there yet.
Yeah, but we're moving in the right direction. Two things have happened recently that I thought were really exciting. If I could, I think one was MHCLG recognizing that this was a community that could really quickly gather requirements, that could spot when all 150 are trying to solve the same problem, and saying, okay, if they're going to spend money helping the sector, then this community was a good way to do it, and that we could actually spot needs on their behalf and build tools. And that feels like an experience I really hope will replicate. Maybe saying, okay, everyone, and maybe get around some of these resourcing problems, because there is cash available centrally. It's just they don't always know how to get it to the right place. And to be able to say, look, actually, whatever, if Oldham have developed a great tool, but actually other authorities want to use it, but Oldham don't have the resources to maintain it and develop it in the direction that people want. Can we be the link to central government and other funding pots that says, okay, we can channel a grant across here to buy out time from someone to Oldham to do that work, or, to allow them to get an extra person in. That felt like a really positive experience. The other was seeing that when there was a period when Jean didn't have as much time bought out to work on the chat, that when people needed the chat updated, that she was actually able to crowdsource a lot of the work to do that from the community. And so nobody had to put in like 4 or 5 days, but if everybody was able to chuck in a couple of hours, then with a community that size, it was possible to get at least some of the work done, even with no cash. And actually that shift to say, well, okay, where can we rely on donations of time, which are easier for people to give than cash, felt like another promising area.
So there's two things there, isn't there? There's one about making sure, I've lost my train of thought because I'm reading things at the same time, sorry. Thank you to everyone who's joined and has got to leave. Thanks for coming. And we'll try and wrap up in the next 5 minutes, I suppose. There's one about doing that link to the money, and okay, you want to do it, but you can't afford to do it. We've got a guy who can pay you to do it. And then the other one about making the tools that we've got more easy to interact with and change. And if we build these behemoths of tools, should we be trying to make them more modular and easier for people to chip in their time and say, well, I don't need to know everything about this tool to work it. I can just do a little bit, and I can fit that module on the side of what's there, and then it grows more over that kind of way.
Yeah. Alistair, bearing in mind it's 2 o'clock, and I think a lot of people are gonna sort of have to roll over to other things. I just wonder if it's worth by asking people to chuck in the chat any thoughts they'd have on what problem could get solved or tool could get built that they would really value over the coming year, because it'd be interesting to see those and to see if that's any different from what we've heard elsewhere. That
would be great. Yeah. I was going to say also, if people have thoughts that they share or what have you, then I will send out a recap to people that have joined in and kind of ask for any thoughts that have evolved kind of after joining the session. Sometimes you kind of hear someone like Tom kind of throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks for half an hour, and you don't have time to quite think about it. So if you then think about it and say, actually, in my setting, that's what could work later, then I'm going to try and get in touch with people and say, have you had any thoughts since then? So I'll send out an email later. But yeah, if people can drop in any thoughts, what would you benefit from? What if I'm here for the next year, for argument's sake, and been paid for by the DFE to do some work for local authorities in terms of sharing data tools. What do you most want me to do?
What's worth building?
Besides getting the latest data into the chat, because that's going to happen anyway. And then I think we'll close up, shall we?
Fantastic.
And thank everyone for coming. Hopefully it was interesting, if not useful, or useful, if not interesting, possibly even both. And if you want to keep in touch, then you've got my email address, obviously through this meeting invite, and hopefully we'll see you in the groups at some point soon.
Cool. Bye-bye.
Any last thoughts from anyone, or should we wrap it up? That's thank yous and goodbyes, isn't it? Okay. I'm just going to sit here and wave until everyone's gone.
It's like the end of Bill and Ben the Flower Pot Men.
Yeah.
Cool.
There we go.
All right, just you know. Cool. Just you and me. How many of those names did you recognise, by the way?